Hmm. Man, oh man, where to start? In light of recent announcements, there's probably going to never be a better time to talk about this. Xenoblade 3 is on its way, and there's been a big amount of praise going to the character designs we've seen so far. With that praise, though, comes the inevitable comparisons to Xenoblade 2's characters. The most common one I've seen is that 3's character designs are toned down compared to 2's. This supposed tone shift was so drastic that some people thought there was a brand new artist brought on for 3. It's not. It's still Masatsugu Saito, the main character designer from 2. This has been really jarring for me to watch, since I can see so many similarities in the strengths of the designs from both games. If the sporadic drip feed of my content mostly revolving around Xenoblade 2 wasn't any indication, I've got an endless amount of appreciation for every little piece of this game. Doesn't mean I like every piece, I just know that a lot of work went into putting this game together. My goal with these videos has been to share a bit of that appreciation with you, the viewers, even if you don't like whatever it is I'm talking about. That's why I think out of everything I've done so far on the channel, this might be the most important video I've made. I'm not sure I've ever seen a game's character designs be as divisive as Xenoblade 2's. There's so much thought put into each design, and I'd like to try to explain some of the things that stick out the most to me. As a quick disclaimer, this video will need to cover some spoiler-related topics, but I'm going to be keeping the story context to a minimum except for one section near the end, and I'll give a warning before we get to that point. Also, as funny as that joke at the start was, we will be using this article as a reference for some specific talking points. The criticisms made do come from a professional eye, and they're also some of the most common criticisms in general. I'll also be using some of the results of a survey that Xenobits and I put together, where some of you got to share your thoughts on the Xenoblade series so far, to get a better understanding of the compliments and complaints the fans have. By no means do the survey results speak for everyone who's played these games, nor are they a comprehensive representation of everything worth talking about in them. Still, the results have given a huge perspective that wouldn't have been possible without the participation of everyone who took the time to fill it out. If you're one of these many people, then thank you so much. I'll only be sharing a small portion of the results in this video, with another video dedicated to sharing them in full coming, hopefully, shortly after this one. Without further ado, let's put my credibility to the test once again. The Freelancer article states that Xenoblade 2's character designs offer limited insight into the character, while only using an image of Pyra as an example. I really disagree with this point. I guess the best place for us to start is the one character everyone loves to rag on the most, Rex. Hell, I've even done it myself on this channel. The thing is, I actually really like this design. I like it even more than his other outfit he gets later in the game, which, as it turns out, also has no pants. That's because I think this original outfit fits his character so much better than the other one. It can tell you a lot about Rex just by the way it looks. He's a salvager, so dressing like this makes sense, you know? Having his diving helmet with him all the time makes me feel like that he's always ready for the next adventure. He gives off spunky JRPG protagonist vibes, and as a spunky JRPG protagonist, that's what he needs in his design. The very first thing you see after starting a new game only emphasizes this. You get to see Rex in his full salvager equipment at work. You learn more about him through his banter with Gramps, and you get to hear his thoughts about the world around him. You see his eyes light up when he thinks he's found treasure. These moments introduce us to traits that'll be explored and accentuated all throughout the game. He's hardworking, he's curious, he's kind, and this is all bolstered by his design. Is it incredibly over the top and something that would be not at all functional in the real world? Yes, but I've seen much sillier ones. Much sillier. This can be said for every other major character too. Like everybody's favorite Nopon, Tora. Well, he's my favorite at least. He's wearing a pair of overalls and goggles like a ton of other mechanic characters. He also wears a bunch of pouches across his chest, which, while I don't think their exact contents are ever given or even used, imply a resourcefulness that's proven multiple times throughout the story. Then there's his mohawk cowlick hair that he's got going on. It's admittedly really silly looking, but I think that's actually a good thing in the context of the rest of his design. It brings a youthful, naive energy that you don't really get from the other parts. And Tora is nothing if not naive. Let's talk about another one of my favorites next, Zeke. At first glance, it just seems like he's trying way too hard to look cool and edgy. I mean, he is, to a certain extent, but that's also part of the charm to his character. There's more than that, though, obviously. Get far enough into the game, and you'll come to learn that Zeke is from the Tantal Titan. For reasons, he decided he had enough of Tantal and left. He's completely different from the stoic Tantalese masses. Not just in mindset, but in physical appearance, too. Nearly every other Tantalese person has red hair and golden eyes, but Zeke's hair and eyes are both gray. In the case of his eye color, it's hinted that he's actually wearing a contact lens to change it. He's actually so disillusioned with the idea of being from Tantal that he's trying to hide even the smallest physical features that show that. Still, he has a connection with his people that he treasures, even if he doesn't want to admit it. His clothes are very much Tantal made, using the same material and marking patterns. Granted, there is a huge pec and ab window modification, but who's complaining about that? The point I'm trying to make here, I guess, is that the narrative can give you a valuable perspective on the way the characters were designed, and the characters can help you appreciate the narrative even more. And that's what good character design should do. Now, it's only fair that I bring up one of the issues that I don't really have a rebuttal for. All of these characters we've talked about up till now are in the main cast, which means that they're all designed by the lead artist, Masatsugu Saito. There's a clear sense of style throughout the ones we've discussed. However, the vast majority of named characters in the game are not designed by Saito. These are the many, many rare blades you can obtain. And thanks to Nintendo leeching most of Monolith's staff at the time to work on Breath of the Wild, the team decided to bring on freelance and guest artists to do these designs. The result was, well, a whole bunch of really cool individual designs that are very, very different from one another. There's no strong sense of unity among them like you get in the main cast. This was one of the most common complaints I noticed in the survey results, and I can't fault people for feeling that way. I personally didn't mind it and felt like the artist's individual strengths fit the characters way more than if Saito had tried to do it. But that's not a perspective everyone shares, and I get that. It seems like this is a criticism that Monolith took to heart for Xenoblade 3, since all of the characters we've seen in that so far seem much more uniform in their art styles. Another issue, one that I actually have myself, is the lack of official artwork these characters have. There are a ton of characters in the game that get a piece of portrait artwork made for them. The problem is that for the vast majority of these characters, that portrait artwork is the only artwork that's readily available in the game itself or its promotional material. The portrait for Rex gets thrown around all the time when people complain about the game. People like to rag on him for looking dorky and, with a stance like this, I understand. Take a look at the art from the collector's edition though. He looks so much more confident and assertive here. Even Gramps is getting in on it. This sells me on Rex's look way more than this wimpy status portrait. I love it when games use stuff like sprite sheets and hand-drawn scenes to get creative with how we see their characters. For Xenoblade 2, this means that it's up to the 3D models to showcase how dynamically a character can express themselves. Thankfully, the quality of the models range from pretty decent at worst to breathtaking at best. The main cast get most of the love in this department again, but I am not kidding when I say that I would not like some of these designs as much as I do without their models looking this good, especially in cutscenes. Alright, I think that's enough of that little tangent. Let's move on. When I think about the way my favorite characters look, one of the things that stands out the most to me is the colors that make up their appearance. And thanks to the time I spent at school this last year, I'm starting to learn why. Let's use these characters from The World Ends With You as an example. There are 3 or 4 colors in each design that are used in very clear, very deliberate ways. Neku uses eye-catching purple, orange, and white. Shiki uses a calmer pink, green, and yellow. And Joshua uses a very muted, almost monochrome palette with shades of white and gray. Each color stands out on its own, but they make a stronger impression with the way that they're used together. There's never too many used either, which makes them easier to remember. They're just as important in defining a character's design as the clothes that they wear. This simple but smart approach is on full display in Xenoblade 2's characters. The article we've been referencing says that the colors are competing with no sense of hierarchy. Once again, I happen to disagree. Let's take a closer look at my second favorite design in the game, Morag. There's an obvious emphasis of black just on first glance, and that fits right along with her initial role in the game as an antagonist linked with the evil JRPG Empire. Even after she defects, she's still a very strict and by-the-book type of person. There's also a noticeable use of gold. It reminds me of her loyalty and pride for her homeland. Take a look at how it's used in the emblem on her hat. The next color is a deep, dark red. This one is used more subtly, and accents on her outfit and on the inner lining of her coat. It makes me think of the quiet frustration she has with the way Morag and the rest of the world are run, and her fervent desire to change things for the better. Finally, there's the ever-reliable white. Like with the red, white is used very sparingly for the most part. However, the upper part of her jacket is almost completely white. White can be associated with things like purity or innocence. And for as cool as she is and as much ass as she can kick, Morag is pretty naive to a bunch of things. One of her primary motivations for joining the party is through coming to this realization herself. I think it's only fitting that the color is used front and center for her. Do I think that these exact connections and interpretations were intentional in the design? No, of course not. But I do think that the colors were chosen with each specific character in mind. There are a lot of characters in the game, yet each one has a distinct palette that infuses life and energy into them. Like, okay, all 3 of these blades are ice types, so they all use white and blue in their designs, right? But look at just how differently they're used. Different shades, different saturations, using some colors more than others, it makes each design have a unique impact despite relying on the same base colors. I think all of this pays off the most in how the palettes of the driver characters mesh with their main blades. One of the main ideas explored in Xenoblade 2, both in story and gameplay, is the relationship formed between drivers and blades. They support each other and make up for what the other half is missing. This can be felt through how they're designed too. Let's use Rex as an example again. Blue is the primary color in his design, while red is the main color of his partner Pyra's. The contrast between the red and blue helps them both stand out. You can really see this in action in the cutscenes where the two are fighting. The bright red sword in Rex's hand doesn't feel like it's his, and you know, it isn't. He's borrowing Pyra's power anytime he fights with it. over time, though, the sword starts to feel like a part of Rex's design. The red and green become inseparable from the blue that was already there. Just look at the cover art if you want to see this in action. The majority of the frame is filled with the sky's white and pale blue, and the grass's dull green. The much more defined blue and red of Rex and Pyra managed to still stand out against everything else and become the focal point of the image though, despite how small they are in comparison to the massive scale of everything else around them. The same goes for any of the main cast. The drivers and their blades have strong contrast between the colors used in their designs. That contrast isn't a bad thing though. It adds on to the narrative while also managing to just be a really clever way to distinguish the characters. And that's what good character design should do. Alright, this is gonna be the toughest discussion point of the video for hopefully obvious reasons. Let's mention one thing right out of the gate. There is sexualization in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I do not like it. I do not blame people for being dissuaded from playing the game because some of the characters' designs rely heavily on sex appeal. That being said, I don't think the sexualization has anything to do with the character designs themselves, and I don't think sex appeal is an objectively bad thing. That might seem a bit confusing, so I'll start trying to explain what I mean by going over two of the most frequent criticisms I've seen in regards to sexualization. First, I don't think it's fair to consider a character sexualized based on their anatomy alone. There are people of all shapes and sizes out there, and I think the game does a pretty good job of representing as many variations as it can. We've got plucky kids, a bunch of buff dudes, some twink dudes, large women, not as large women, abomination creatures. If you can think of it, it's probably there. The most common points of criticism are towards how unrealistic the proportions of the female characters are. Dahlia here gets some of the worst of it. And I'm gonna be honest, I've seen women built just like her plenty of times throughout my life. There is nothing unrealistic about her body. Well, except, the whole rabbit stuff, but besides that, she's a very lovely lady. Unrealistic isn't even necessarily a bad thing in a design, especially for a fantasy JRPG like this. The uncanniness of something like Newt's giant hat arms make her design stick out. There are plenty of people who dislike this, which is fine. But I bet that even those who dislike the design can still clearly remember most of it. I think that means that it's done its job well. Besides their bodies, the next common association with sexualization the character designs receive is their clothing. I don't think you can fully equate a character wearing revealing clothing to them being sexualized either. It's impossible for me to deny that certain characters' outfits are made to accentuate some of their traditionally attractive physical features. But just because the ESRB sees some cleavage and talks about it in their rating explanation, it doesn't mean that the characters they're describing will ever be the subject of anything sexual within the game. A revealing outfit can depict any number of things besides sexuality. Maturity, confidence, carefreeness, strength, things like that. Just like with the complaints on body shape, most of the issues people have with clothing are directed towards the female characters. To be fair, the vast majority of playable characters in the game are female, so they have a higher sample size to go by in general. Even so, a few male characters wear provocative stuff themselves. Gorg is wearing a single strip of cloth across his chest that shows off his entire midriff with plenty of underboob to spare. We already talked about Zeke refusing to wear a shirt, and there's my personal favorite, the front and back windows on Jin's second outfit. Just look at that deep cleavage. Anyway, there's a reason I've been driving this point about the lack of common criticisms for the male character designs, and it goes back to our good friend, the survey results. In the over 1,800 responses we received, almost 85% of those people said that they identified as male. This is a pretty substantial majority. I don't know if the actual total percentage of everyone who's played Xenoblade 2 is that dense with people who identify as male, but I think it's safe to assume that they are the majority of the audience. This also means that the majority of the opinions and discussions you're likely to run into online are coming from men. All of the most viewed and most popular critiques of Xenoblade 2's character designs and its sexualization were made by men. Almost all of these critiques are focused on the female character design specifically. Funnily enough, the Freelancer article has no mention whatsoever of the designs being too sexual. I fully realize the irony in me bringing this up, being yet another male who is making yet another critique of Xenoblade 2's character designs. However, my opinion on this specific issue should not and cannot be valued more than the opinions of those who understand it the most: women. A little over 9% of the responses in the survey came from people who identify as female. The number of responses that criticized sexualization in Xenoblade 2 was right around 10%. These are both relatively small percentages, and while the latter does show that the majority of the people who experience Xenoblade 2 don't personally mind its issues, it's important to see which people make up that 10% and what criticisms they have. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the responses that mention issues with sexualization came from men. This is just in terms of numbers, though. If we use percentages of these demographics instead, the amount of non-male responses start to look much closer to the male responses. So it's safe to say that there is an issue with sexualization that everyone can see, regardless of gender. The thing is that not everyone is seeing the same issue. Almost all of the criticisms mentioned by males fall into the two general umbrella complaints I brought up earlier: problems with female characters' body proportions, and problems with the way female characters dress. We already talked about why I don't really see that as sexualization. The responses from people who weren't male had a completely different point of focus for their criticisms. They have problems with how certain female characters are represented in their narrative beats and character interactions. This is why I think all of the complaints were directed towards the female characters. They're always the ones being subjected to this treatment, not the male characters. Many of these responses actually praised the designs of the female characters. But the voyeuristic camera angles, cringy, creepy dialogue, the infamous bed scene with Mithra, the weird moments between Poppy and Tora, these are the issues that those who aren't male have with Xenoblade 2's sexualization. And I also think that these are issues that most reasonable people who've experienced the game have too. Even the popular stuff by male creators bring up these issues. They just end up getting wrapped back into the argument against the designs themselves. The game doesn't sexualize its characters with their designs, it sexualizes them through how it portrays them. A character doesn't need to have a sexy design to be sexualized. Saber from the Fate series is one of the most relevant examples of this. If you know, you know. On the other hand, you don't need to like a sexy design on a character. I much prefer Mithra's censored design. The added emphasis on the color black that comes with the tights she's wearing complements the rest of the design and her character incredibly well. It's just a subjective preference. Subjectivity is a very relevant topic in the Xenoblade community as of late. It seems like any opinion shared is simultaneously dissected to bits in order to find the smallest thing quote-unquote incorrect with the statement, and horribly oversimplified just to misconstrue it for some quick social media engagement. That's where I think a big problem has formed in how we engage with each other online. It's become easy and popular to just be mean and inconsiderate when someone has an opinion we don't agree with. And I really don't think that's a good thing. It's partly why this video has taken so long for me to make. I don't want to say the wrong thing or miscommunicate a point that ends up interpreted as something horrible. So it's been incredibly difficult just to find the words to say what I want to say. People should feel comfortable with sharing their thoughts on the video games they play, whether they liked them or not. Opinions aren't always able to be expressed so easily. It can be impossible to say everything you want to say in a single 280 character tweet or a few paragraphs of a forum post. I think it's important to remind ourselves of that sometimes when we read something online that we disagree with or dislike. This has become painfully imperative over the last few years, where the majority of everyone's social interaction happens online. Going weeks at a time without seeing another person can drive you insane, so I can't blame people for dumping thoughts and feelings haphazardly. But sometimes you just gotta slow down for a second and really take in everything that's going on around you. My point here is that I think it's much easier for us to share our opinion than it is for us to listen to the opinion of others. And to me at least, I think we should always be listening as much as we can. Listening to the perspectives that I have during the process of this video has been really helpful for me, honestly. It allowed me to see a fuller scope of not just the issue of sexualization, but how the characters are represented in general. I understand the flaws that make people dislike them, and I also better understand why I like them in spite of those flaws. There are undoubtedly going to be a bunch of people who think my opinion on this issue is completely wrong. If you're one of those people, then I just want to say thanks for watching this far and listening to me for this long. I think it'd be ignorant of me to say that my view is flawless, and I'm always trying to learn and grow as much as I can, so please feel welcome to share your opinion in the comments. I'll try my best to actually respond to some of them on this video for once and not be an anxious mess when I see a new one pop up. Anyway, I think it's about time that we wrap everything we've talked about up to this point in one neat little bow. A love letter to my favorite design and one of my favorite characters in the game. God, I love everything about this character so much. Her look, her personality, her story, her voice.
Oi, did you see something?
I'm not the only person who feels this way about her. There is no shortage of public adoration for the Welsh cat girl. Everyone has their favorite thing they like about her. As for me, I just really love the execution of her design. Or designs, I guess. Hopefully you listened to that spoiler warning. These almost look like two completely different characters, but they are both Nia. Let's talk about this a bit more in depth. I don't think I'll ever forget the first scene we're introduced to Nia. There's so much hype surrounding this badass group of drivers and blades that Rex is going to be working with. In come 3 certified rad dudes that look like they're ready to fight at any second, and then a cat girl wearing a bright yellow onesie and a cute white hood. She's so adorable, I just want to pat her head. Wait, are those knives? Everything you need to know about Nia as a character at this early point of the story is portrayed in this design. She's feisty, she's sweet, and she's more than willing and able to protect herself if the need arises. The bright yellow jumpsuit she wears that completely covers her body, combined with the huge armored boots, make her seem very closed off and protected, physically and emotionally. Underneath that wall that she's put up, though, is who she is at her core. Kind and compassionate, wanting nothing more than to help others. This is visually communicated through the white and red accents on her outfit. We see this side of her as early as the conversation she and Rex have on the way to the ancient ship at the beginning of the game. Even though she laughs at him, she can't help but be a little moved at his unabashed optimism. She betrays her comrades, people who she knows very likely can and will kill her, to protect that optimism. Because deep down, she knows that very same thing is within her too. That optimism has been taken advantage of in the past, though, which is why she can't bring herself to fully trust Rex and the others with who she truly is at first. We can see her struggle with this in moments like the climax of Chapter 3, where it looks like she's about to try using her powers before being taken out of the fight. There's also the hot spring scene in Chapter 4, which, side note, is one of the least offensive instances of the very redundant JRPG trope I've experienced. Mithra can tell that Nia isn't completely who she says she is. Instead of approaching the issue with accusations or doubt, Mithra is very careful and respectful in how she speaks about it with Nia. She also doesn't press the issue any farther than what Nia is comfortable with. This is one of my favorite scenes in the game, just with how genuine this little interaction is. There are plenty of aspects of myself that I'm not exactly comfortable with, And I can tell you that I much prefer when someone talks about them like Mithra does here instead of trying to force an answer out of me like some people might try to do. Over time, Nia develops a close-knit bond with the party and Rex especially. This makes the eventual shit river that Rex has to go through terrible for her to watch. The one person whose dream she had finally come to believe in again has that dream completely shattered. This time, it's her turn to help Rex find his drive to move onward. She's the first one to confront him when he's about to give up and leave everyone behind. Eventually, they arrive in the Spirit Crucible Elpis and have to make their way to the bottom of a massive cave system. It's during this time that we learn about Nia's past. I'm not going to go over it in detail because this video is already long enough, but the gist of it is that she had a pretty decent family life that turned pretty awful very quickly, and she carries a burden of guilt because of it. It's the root of the trust issues she's had since the beginning of the story. When the party reaches the end of the Spirit Crucible, they're met with a trial left by the legendary hero Adam, and just when it seems like defeat is certain, she lets herself be who she truly is in one of the best scenes in the entire game. Blade Nia's reveal got me insanely hyped the first time I saw it. One of the biggest contributors to this is all the foreshadowing that led up to this moment. I missed so many of these little details that I mentioned during my initial playthrough with how subtle they are, but they're still deliberate enough that you can't miss it when you revisit them. The other biggest contributor is the design itself. The first thing that catches my eye when I look at this is the much stronger focus on white and red. Colors that were originally used as accents are now the main focal point. It's symbolic of Nia's genuine nature and love she has for the people most important to her. The dress that she's wearing kinda looks like a flower in bloom. The frills gently bend every which way to create this really beautiful silhouette. This outfit also shows a lot more skin than her previous one, but I think this is one of the instances I talked about earlier where sex appeal in a design can actually be used to benefit the character as a whole. This is Nia at her most powerful, at least canonically, and most times we see her in this form she's doing something badass or otherwise incredibly helpful. The initial reveal is done very tastefully. No awkward camera ogling, no characters making off-color comments, just pure wholesome acceptance. And she's treated like this all throughout the rest of the story. This is how you pull off an attractive design, by showing that the character is more than just attractive. She represents the best of what the game can do with its characters. Any work of fiction can live or die by its characters. This is especially true for video games, and maybe even doubly so for RPGs. Unlike most every other medium, they're a huge investment of your time and focus. You'll probably be looking at the same few characters for dozens of hours before you finish them, so they need to do something to keep your attention. This can be done in many ways. Sometimes it's good character writing, sometimes it's a memorable appearance, and sometimes, the best times, it's both. I think Xenoblade 2's characters do that. The narrative makes the design stronger, and the designs embody what the narrative is trying to say. I mentioned it before, but I really doubt this video will change anyone's opinion on how they feel about Xenoblade 2's characters. I just wanted to put an opinion out there that was a little bit more positive than the most popular ones. It's not more or less valuable than anyone else's, but after putting this all together, I can comfortably and confidently say that it is my opinion. I love these character designs. No matter if you agree with that statement or disagree with it, your opinion matters just the same. It matters to you. And that's the only reason you really need.